Good morning. Welcome back to Smart Growth America's Equity Summit. And thank you for joining us for our third and final day. In case you're joining us for the first time and you're not following me on my Twitter handle @SmartGrowthCEO, my name is Calvin Gladney and I am President and CEO of Smart Growth America. We're excited to continue this week's discussions with a great group of experts, practitioners, and policymakers to discuss how to center advancing racial equity in smart growth work. Our first 2 days focused first on land use and development, including climate change, and then transportation and thriving communities. Today, we're going to explore how to make economic development equitable. We're going to discuss how to ensure growth and development benefits existing residents and leads to economic mobility, wealth building, and shared prosperity, and avoid past mistakes like displacement. But before we start the program, and I'll briefly talk about our sponsors, we do have one big announcement. It's kind of the never-ending story. This won't be the end of our 2022 Equity Summit. We're gonna turn this event into something more like year-round programming. In addition to this big event over the last 3 days, we're gonna have follow-up events in March, so stay tuned for those announcements. We want to try to bring back our keynote speaker, Majora Carter, our keynote speaker, Vignesh, and other speakers from this week. Bring them back to answer a lot of the questions that happened in the chat, because if you've been following, the chat's been lit. And there's just been way more questions that we can answer. And all of our speakers have been so excited to continue to engage with you. We want to keep this conversation about advancing racial equity going. We're also going to get to dive into other issues of equity which we couldn't touch upon this week, whether it's public transit or issues that are specific to the challenges and opportunities in rural America. So stay tuned. We're going to keep walking the walk and talking the talk when it comes to advancing racial equity. And this is going to be content we're going to do over the course of this year. Let's briefly also just thank our sponsors. I'm going to start with thanking our event sponsor, Citi. This 3-day virtual summit was made possible by Citi, who's our event sponsor, and they have this awesome initiative called the Action for Racial Equity. And it represents an unprecedented effort to leverage Citi's core business capabilities, as well as Citi Foundation philanthropy, to help address racial equity and justice in the US. And so thank you, Citi, for your event sponsorship. We also want to thank our 2 presenting sponsors, Citi Health and NeighborWorks America. Citi Health is an initiative of the Beaumont Foundation and Kaiser Permanente, and they're proud to support the summit. CitiWork works to advance policies at the local level that ensure that all people have access to healthy places and healthy choices. So if you want to learn more about how cities can use policies to reduce or remove systemic barriers to health, you can go to citihealth.org. Also want to thank our other presenting sponsor, NeighborWorks America. NeighborWorks provided support as a presenting sponsor for this summit, and for 40 years, they've strived to make every community a place of opportunity. NeighborWorks provides professional development and training to housing and community development organizations nationwide. And finally, wanted to thank our closed captioning sponsor, and you can see, shout out to Jeremy and others, our ASL interpreters, and they are here through the generous support of AARP. AARP not only made the closed captioning sponsors, but they have lots of resources that you should check out. So you can visit AARP's Livable Communities Hub at aarp.org/livable and sign up for their newsletter, or by texting LIVABLE to 50757. So before we go any further in the program, I am pleased to introduce my colleague, my fellow New Yorker, Chris Zimmerman, Smart Growth America's Vice President for Economic Development. He's going to walk us through a couple of housekeeping announcements, do a couple more awesome polls. If you haven't been doing the polls or weren't around the last 2 days, join into this and share some thoughts about yesterday before getting us started on day 3. Chris?
Thank you, Calvin, and good morning, everybody. As Calvin said, we got a little bit of housekeeping we want to take care of first. First off, these sessions are being recorded and captioned and will be available online after the event at our website, smartgrowthamerica.org. Secondly, we're striving to make this event as accessible as possible, both to current participants and those watching the recording in the future on our YouTube channel. In addition to our ASL interpreters, there's a closed captioning provided through Zoom. To access the closed captioning, just click the bottom in the controls for live transcript. They can be viewed either as subtitles on the screen or in a separate window or sidebar. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive credits from the American Planning Association. To log your AICP credits, visit the American Planning Association's website at planning.org, log into your account, and search for the name of today's event, which is Smart Growth America's Equity Summit. You can also use the direct link provided in the chat. We also hope that you'll share your thoughts on social media throughout the day. You can tag us at Smart Growth USA and the hashtag Smart Growth Equity. We'd love to hear what's resonating with you as the day unfolds. And just a reminder, put your questions for speakers in the questions feature if you can, not in the chat feature, because frankly, the chat carries a lot of extreme of information and we might miss your question. If you use the questions feature, we're more likely to be able to get it asked. Now, as with the previous 2 days, we want to start with a few interactive polls so we can all learn about something about each other. If we were in a room, all together like we used to do in the old days, we could have people put their hands up and everybody would see. So this is going to help us get to know who we all are. And so we have some participants who won't have been here the first 2 days. So let me say we're going to have a couple of questions that you'll have seen before if you were here. We'll also leave each poll open for a little longer today to give everyone a chance to respond and to see the results. You can respond using either of the options on the screen by texting or by going to the URL that's listed. These interactive polls will allow us to see all see the results in real time, and that URL on the screen, which is also in the chat. If you click on that or type the URL into your phone or into a new window on your computer, answer the poll questions there. Now, there's also an option for texting to the number on the screen and in the chat. Once you have the polls open on your phone or computer, be sure to keep it open throughout as we'll return to more poll questions and it will update in real time. So let's go to the first question. We want to hear, again, how you identify your own expertise. How do you rank your own expertise or comfort level with advancing racial equity through your work? Click the number that best describes your level of expertise or comfort with addressing racial inequity in your work, from someone with no real experience, which would be 1, up to expert at 5. Where do you rank? And I can see lots of responses coming in real quickly here, and you can see the time up in the corner that remains. There's still about 20 seconds to go. You can see the results coming in, and there's about 10 seconds left. And I can see a lot of us are pretty much in the middle. And there we go. All right. So our second question, again, those who were here the last days, this will be familiar. What brought you to the summit this year? Why are you here? Choose the answer that best describes you. Were you brought here because there was a particular speaker that you had heard about, or you were just interested in hearing interesting people have thoughtful discussions about equity and smart growth, or so on and so forth. And again, there's about 20 seconds or so remaining. It's very close between A and C, which I think was similar to the previous days. And there we go. All right. Now, our third question is a new one you won't have seen the last 2 days, and it relates to what Calvin said earlier about our continuing our Equity Summit content through 2022. We want to get your feedback on what sorts of topics we should cover. So as we did yesterday, we're going to have a free association exercise with a word cloud. We're asking you to, in one single response with no punctuation, Enter as many words or phrases as you like describing what you think we should cover. Note, you can respond only once and you don't need punctuation. So once you hit enter, that's it. But you can put all the words you want in. Please do put spaces between the words. You can put in a sentence or just a series of topical words. We want to hear what kind of topics we should cover in future events, whether half-day events, one-off webinars, discussions with panelists, or other types of equity events. And of course, we can see as everybody enters the range of topics that folks are interested in. And quite a few interesting things. I note the big request for rural, which is something we heard in the chat the last few days too. Another topic I know we look forward to getting into in more depth as we move forward. Housing, of course, unsurprisingly, and zoning really big. Great. Well, thank you very much. So here we are on day 3. And yesterday, of course, we focused on transportation. Our topic was specifically the role of technology in addressing equitable mobility. We started with Vignesh Swaminathan, the president and CEO of Crossroad Lab, known to his million followers on TikTok as Mr. Barricade. He talked about learning how to use new technology, specifically in the form of social media, to engage and inform people about the benefits of some old technology, demonstration projects, and roadway design change to create safer, cheaper, and greater transportation options, especially for those who can't or don't drive. Then we heard from a panel moderated by Dr. Regan Patterson of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation that included Pittsburgh's Acting Director of Mobility and Infrastructure, Kim Lucas, Tiffany Chu, the founder of Remix, and Bob Dean, the CEO of the Center for Neighborhood Technology. They discussed the possibilities and limitations of technology change to improve racial equity in transportation and gave real-world examples of where technology can cause disruption for the better, such as the universal mobility pilot that Pittsburgh is testing. Today, for day 3, of course, our focus is economic development. At last year's edition of this summit, Dr. Andre Perry of the Brookings Institution told us, equity is stimulus. If you want to grow the economy, if you want to improve conditions, build equity. This is a good summary of the SGA approach to economic development. As we often say, if it isn't equitable growth, it isn't smart growth. Our program last year emphasized the economic case that the pursuit of justice is also a path to prosperity. At the same time, we have to confront the very real concern that new investment in neglected areas doesn't necessarily equal new opportunity, new income, or new wealth for the households of those areas. It certainly hasn't in the past. What will make the future different? The very improvements that will revitalize a corridor or a neighborhood, better infrastructure, improved transit service, new businesses, enhanced parks, will tend to generate increased land values, which can force out longtime residents and legacy businesses who can't afford higher rents. How can we ensure that they are beneficiaries of change? In her inspiring keynote on Tuesday, Majora Carter talked about the importance of providing opportunities for people to stay when it gets nice, to participate in the trajectory of their neighborhood. That is the challenge of equitable economic development. On the opening day of the summit, our board chair, our Smart Growth America board chair, Madeline Fraser-Cook, highlighted the importance of implementation, actually getting things done. And that's very much our focus today. We want to work on the practical business of making equitable development happen. How can we make smart growth economic development? And when I say smart growth economic development, what I mean is the creation of walkable urban environments in any city, suburb, or small town at any scale. How can we make that kind of development benefit historically marginalized communities, the folks who in the past have not benefited and often been harmed by waves of growth and development? How, as a practical matter, can we accomplish changes that create the kind of places that have 15-minute neighborhoods and complete streets? A, without displacing existing communities, those with households of generally lower income wealth, and B, specifically channel benefits to those communities. Or to put it, as today's keynote speaker has succinctly described it, better neighborhoods, same neighbors. In today's program, we'll get 4 perspectives on implementing equitable development. We'll start with a conversation with a private investor whose company has been widely recognized for making positive social impacts in our underinvested communities. We'll follow that with a panel that includes a nonprofit housing provider, the leader of a national community development organization, and a local elected official. Now, before we get to that opening conversation, we're going to do 2 final polls related to today's topic. The URL is once again on the chat and on your screen, but hopefully you just left that tab window open. It will update with the next question as we advance. So the first one is, in your opinion, rapid investment in economic growth in a neighborhood, and pick your choice of the 4 here. And you've got about 35 seconds. A, always a win. B, good in theory, but difficult to implement equitably in practice. C, a positive thing if it can be harnessed to benefit existing residents and support the vision for the community. D, should be avoided at all costs because the harm outweighs the benefits. And as we see, we're coming down to the final 10 seconds. A lot of people in the C category. Very good. Well, that's good because that is the questions of B and C are precisely what we're talking about today. So thanks for that. We have one last question, and that is, what do you see as the biggest barrier to equitable economic development? And again, you see a set of choices. It isn't profitable for developers and investors. The assumption that a rising tide will always lift all boats, insufficient public funding committed to the goal, few policies and strategies with a proven track record of success, the challenge of getting the public, private, and community-based stakeholders to the table, and it's difficult to direct new economic value toward preventing displacement. 6 choices. And about 15 seconds. Very interesting. And 3, 2, 1. And there we go. Well, thank you very much for participating in this and letting us all get to know a little bit more about each other. And that will bring us to our opening conversation. To start off our discussion today, we'll have a presentation discussion with Martin Muoto, founder and managing partner at SoLa Impact in California. Martin began personally investing in real estate in South Los Angeles, Compton, Watts, and other historically neglected and overlooked Black and brown communities for over a decade. Martin launched SoLa Impact's first fund in 2014, using private equity to rehabilitate affordable housing properties. His early vision and leadership in creating funds that deliver true social impact has led to Martin being featured in Forbes, Black Enterprise, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and other leading publications. SoLa now has 1,500 units, with 1,500 more in the pipeline of ground-up developments, and is closing on its 4th fund, the Black Impact Fund, which will add thousands more units to California's affordable and workforce housing supply. One published report I saw observed that to persuade institutional investors to join this new fund, Muoto must find a balance between SoLa's financial objectives and its social goals. How he is meeting this challenge is most intriguing. Martin grew up in West Africa and came to the United States to study at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. His background in private equity and technology has supported his vision for data-driven impact investing and has driven SoLa's disruptive, vertically integrated model. SoLa Impact has grown to become one of the largest Black-led developers in California, with over 140 employees, several hundred contractors, and was recognized by Forbes as the 7th fastest growing minority-led firm in 2020. We look forward to hearing his perspective on social impact investing and enabling racial equality. And to start off, we have a short video.
South Central Los Angeles probably has one of the most notorious histories of any city in the entire country. The Bloods and the Crips, dramatic poverty, the LA riots. Having grown up in Nigeria, I looked around and went, this is like the suburbs. Even in tough areas, the vast majority of people are good, hardworking people that want a safe place for their kids.
SoLa is a social impact real estate fund, but it's not your typical fund. We want to create more jobs, provide educational access to the youth here, and also build more affordable housing. Opportunity Zone legislation is affording SoLA the chance to do the work that we're already doing, but on a much larger, grander scale. We sit down with every single tenant to get a sense of who they are, what their aspirations are. 53% of our place tenants were homeless before signing a lease.
Every night you just hug them and you just tell them tomorrow's gonna be better, but it's not, you know. I didn't have a chance. Like, nobody showed me no apartments. Single moms, you're out of the question. I do work. I do care for my kids. I'm not about to have my kids on the streets like that. Like, please, you know? Give us a chance. My daughter she went crazy. She was like, I don't want to go anywhere. I'm here. This is my home.
We want to be able to provide people with the types of apartments that reflect how much we value them as part of our community, and SoLA does that.
We have a strong track record in affordable housing development, but in order to really create prosperity, we had to create jobs. And that led us to buy 6 warehouses in the heart of South Central and make it the nation's first Opportunity Zone business campus.
This campus will be about 900 people, different types of businesses interacting. We call it the Beehive because we want people to mingle, we want that energy.
To have resources for creatives, for entrepreneurs, for students, to me is going to really transform this community, and I'm so excited to be a part of that.
Gentrification, that's a scary word for the people who are actually living in these cities asking for resources. The work that is being done with SoLa Impact is paying attention to the people who make up the energy of the city and being able to invest in them, and giving them opportunity to stay where they are.
Shout out to the world. Hope I make it one day.
I know that there are some critics to the Opportunity Zone legislation, but we don't have to prove that it can work. It is working.
I do feel a sense of pride in this community. I do. And people like SoLA, they're trying to make things better for us and our children. And this isn't just a landlord-tenant thing. SoLA is so much more than that.
Welcome, Martin.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd like to start by asking you to tell us a little bit about, what led you to found SoLa Impact. And, a lot of California entrepreneurial stories seem to start in like the garages of somebody's house. I've heard, is it true that SoLA started in the garage of one of your buildings?
Almost true. I had a building that had a large storage space. Ironically, it had been occupied by a marijuana grower. They didn't have a permit. It was an illegal operation. They abandoned it. And so when I bought the building, we ended up clearing it out. And that's where our first offices were. It was on 76th and Vermont, which is literally the 2 main cross streets of South Central. So technically speaking, it was a storage space, but very close to a garage. I think the longer version of that story is as that piece laid out, that came out in late 2019, 2020, before the world changed, and was put together by Forbes and the SoLa Impact Center, which we were really appreciative about. I grew up in West Africa. I saw firsthand, I was there until I was 18, firsthand sort of just the impact that income inequality, what is referred to as tribalism, but it's a different version of racism, how that played out in societies. I actually grew up in the North, which is where Boko Haram has taken over and has been a big influence and really an unfortunate consequence of a very polarized society from an income perspective, from a religious perspective, from an ethnic perspective. And so I think I spent the last 30 years in the US and had most of my career in private equity. Was fortunate enough to work for firms like General Atlantic Partners, which have also been big supporters of ours. And I think that along the way, having access, sometimes having access to the room where it happens and seeing how things get done, it has always weighed heavily on me that can you use free enterprise and capitalism and some of the unique attributes of the American economic and social system, can you use them to solve some of the problems that capitalism has created? And in my view, capitalism in the extreme has created sort of a lot of the tension that exists in the country today, primarily around income inequality, which is intimately tied to racial inequality. I did start, investing in real estate over a little over 12 years ago, and really studied the broader Southern California market and realized that there was a pocket that very few investors, very few developers, very few builders were focused on. And I ended up spending weeks, actually months, walking the streets of South Central, driving the streets of South Central. As I looked at listings, the listings for possible properties would say, do not walk the property. I would walk the property. They would say, do not disturb the tenants. I'd knock on doors. I would talk to tenants. And I really sort of got to know the community at some level. And really, my investment thesis was very simple, which was the vast majority of people are good, hardworking people that want a safe place for their kids. And if you could provide them with a very good product, in our first several funds, it was a rehabbed apartment. We bought some tough buildings, some old buildings. We inherited the sins of the past, but worked through those in our view in a very intentional, deliberate way, with developing without displacing, and really built a real estate business that now has over 1,500 units in the broader South LA area, and we're in the path of building another 1,500 that are at various stages of development and construction. So that really is the longer-winded version of the story.
I understand that your fund exclusively invests in Black and Brown communities. Can you say something about choosing that as an investment strategy?
It's I think that there's a interesting facet in all of life. So sometimes the opportunity chooses you. You don't always choose the opportunity. And so as I looked at where I would spend my capital, and having been in private equity, I was very data driven in my approach. And as I looked at the South LA market, most of the other markets in Los Angeles have been incredibly good over the last 15 years. Koreatown, downtown Venice. I actually, I've made investments in Venice, Echo Park, but it really struck me as that why aren't they other developers at scale? They're certainly mom and pop developers, but why weren't they professional developers in the broader South LA market? And as I spoke to people, almost every broker and developer and builder said, where are you investing again? And I go, yeah, Watts, Compton, what has historically been known as South Central. And they go, oh, you're going to lose your shirt. You're going to have horrible tenants. You're going to be dealing with evictions. They're going to trash your buildings. You're going to be dealing with drug dealers. And they were largely untrue. are not completely untrue, but very largely untrue. And so to me, it did make sense that there was this stigma that had lasted for 30 plus years that had come out of the LA riots, the Watts, the crack cocaine epidemic, and this community was still judged by things that happened 30 years ago. At the same time, I always said, look, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So I had capital, I had resources that could be applied, and there was less competition. So I say we invest exclusively in Black and brown communities for all the right reasons and some of the wrong reasons, which is that no one else is there. There's good value to be found. There are good returns to be found if you can do it intelligently with the operational intensity that it requires. But it is also hard work. We've done it right most of the time. There are times that we've struggled to get it right, but it's really pulling all those pieces together. I think the final point I'll make is that for me, being a double bottom line company, being a company that did social impact as well as for-profit investments was always very intuitive, because the truth is the better our tenants do, the better we do. And so why that was controversial, or why folks feel that you have to pick one or the other, still is a bit of a head scratcher. But I think that we do find there's certainly folks that are somewhat skeptical that you can do both. And I think we've been on a quest to demonstrate, both with financial results and social impact, quantifiable results, that you can actually do both in an impactful, intentional, and scalable way.
Okay, so you've made the point that it is possible and demonstrated that it's possible to do this and be profitable. Let me ask you a little bit on kind of the other side of that. And you talked earlier about, kind of trying to find some balance with, capitalism being the source of a lot of the problems we're talking about. But you're very much capitalist, right? You're operating in the capitalist system. And, I'm struck by that observation that I read that I mentioned in my opening, that you put yourself in the position of having to balance the demands of investors who are in this to make a profit, right, with the social goals that obviously are very real for you. So can you talk a little bit more about that? About okay, so you found ways to make money in these places. How do you also ensure that it actually does benefit the folks who live there? And I'm thinking about this in terms of lessons for other folks, both people who might be in the kind of business you're in and interested, but also for other people that are, stakeholders. Apart from, you're a good guy and you're trying to do the right thing. What lessons are there to learn about how it's possible to do, as I know you say, do well by doing good?
And I think that's probably the underlying facet. Our motto is doing well by doing good. And it's not doing well and doing good. It's actually doing well by doing good. And so I'll give you a couple of anecdotes and see if it runs long. But in our second year of operation, I came to the US on a full scholarship. I would not have been able to come to the States had Penn Wharton not given me full financial aid. And so it's always been close to my heart. And so in our second year of operation, this was before I was taking a salary in the company, and we basically were not yet making money. We decided to give away about $10,000 worth of scholarships from the operating company and put on an award ceremony, and we picked candidates. Some of them were our tenants, some of them were not our tenants. And we gave away $2,500 worth of scholarships to 4 deserving young people, all from South LA, that were going on to college. And 2 things happened in that experience. The first is that one young lady came to the event. We had a sort of very small makeshift dinner without her parents. And I said, you're getting an award. Where are your parents? And she goes, well, they're not that excited about me going on to college because we have a family business and they would prefer I stay and help with the family business. And I went, wow. I mean, that is the gravitational pull of poverty exemplified. Right. The second thing that happened is that we started to get applications. The second and third year we did this, we started to grow that scholarship fund. And after one of our award ceremonies, and when we would go out to get members of the community to apply, we started getting better applicants in the buildings in terms of credit score. We barely look at FICO scores. I haven't seen a 600 FICO score in a long time, but more longer job tenure, and more money in the bank. And I asked one of the tenants, well, how did you find out about SoLa, and what made you apply? And she goes, oh, I heard if I live in one of your buildings, my kids can go to college. And I went, whoa, marketing got a little bit ahead of ourselves. But today we now give away on an annual basis $250,000. It is fortunately funded by some of our very wealthy LPs and some corporate partners. But because we have the scale, we can attract like-minded and mission-aligned both investors and corporations to really invest in the community in that way. So the scholarship, as one example, was never intended to sort of have some type of payback, but it did, and it has. Today, and this is sort of late breaking news, certainly, I don't know if you save it for the end, but we are announcing that Riot Games has made a $2+ million contribution to our affiliated nonprofit to build out our tech and entrepreneurship center. So in one of the buildings in the Beehive, for years, this has been a passion of Sherry Francois, our Chief Impact Officer, and it's been to try to use esports to create essentially a tech YMCA, right? Where we can bring young people from the community. For her words were always that esports were the chocolate on the broccoli, right? Young people wanted to play games and wanted to learn about video games. So this will enable SoLa and its partners to really provide content and courses in video game development, in programming and coding and quality assurance, but not only in those hard tech skills, but in project management and in accounting and in business management, so that young people can find a place where they can learn life skills and learn and job skills and really move them forward. And so these are examples. We've created a affiliated nonprofit to allow some of our mission aligned investors and partners to really push that capital into the community in ways that we think are really both scalable and move the community forward. So those are just real examples of things that we chose to do because we think that ultimately they both allow us to, continue to improve on our mission, but also really, provide our investors good returns.
It occurs to me, Martin, that we have obviously very broad audience today, and some of them will be less familiar with some of the technical aspects of what you're discussing. Can you just talk a little bit about what a social impact fund is and how it is that SoLa makes money?
Well, I thought it was apparent. I went over the last year to raise what we call the Black Impact Fund. It's our fourth fund, and we spent a lot of time with the largest philanthropies in the country, the largest institutional investors, from the pension funds to the endowments, to the large pockets of capital, and many of them wanted to talk about ESG, environmental social governance initiative. They wanted to talk about diversity and inclusion, and I would talk to them about those, and then I'd say, well, we're a social impact fund, and they go, oh, we don't have that bucket. And so go talk to our real estate guys, and often the real estate guys, and usually they are guys, not even women, and they certainly didn't look like folks on this side of our presentation. Were very conservative, and they would look at me going, what, you're investing just in Black and brown communities? And so the net is that we, for our first several funds, bought buildings. Often these were with a lot of deferred maintenance, a lot of vacancies, a lot of delinquencies. We turned those buildings around. We worked with the tenants. We have never Ellis acted a tenant. We never, we obviously expect tenants to ultimately pay rent, but we find creative ways for them to really stay housed. We invest significantly in the buildings that we buy, turn those around, and then continue to rent them out. We have a large population that has been formerly homeless, so they do have various government subsidies, and we work with about 40 plus, 50 plus nonprofit partners that work very closely with us. Their number one issue across all of the nonprofit partners, particularly in cities, urban cities like Los Angeles, is the lack of affordable housing. And we're a provider at scale of affordable housing. So they often help us both bring the tenants, vet the tenants, but then once the tenants are successfully housed, I always say the sins of the past don't stop there. They come back to revisit them. And so it really is the ability to keep them successfully housed. And so we have a number of programs that around financial literacy, job training, drug intervention programs, domestic abuse programs that we don't provide ourselves. We provide in conjunction with these incredible nonprofit partners that make sure that our tenants stay successfully housed, and ultimately we make returns through rents and the profitability of the buildings. And we're very proud to have started to move over the last 3 years into more in the ground up development. Again, that caused some investors heartburn. Some institutional investors prefer you only do work on the rehab side, but we had 1,500 units in the broader South LA area, and it dawned on me that we hadn't added one unit to the housing stock. Right, we had kept units naturally occurring affordable. We preserved the affordability of a lot of units and invested, in greenifying them, making them more energy efficient, and so on. But we hadn't added one unit to the housing stock. And today, candidly, because of policies that organizations like Smart Growth America have really pushed into some of the leading urban cities, LA has done a better job than many around transit-oriented development and land use changes that allowed for waivers of parking and things like that, that really helped our business model solidify in the area of development. So we have 1,500 units now in various stages of construction, but we intend to build another 4,000 in the broader Southern California and perhaps a few in Northern California over the next 24 to 36 months.
Sounds great. I want to make sure I understood, because I was listening to you, describe kind of how you went about this and make sure I kind of understand what the model is. It sounds like at the front end, there's sort of two parts to this, the front end and the back end. The front end, in terms of raising capital, it seems like you specifically pursued investors, some of them institutional, who would be supportive of the social impact agenda that you have and would be perhaps more favorable to that. Is that right?
At times, I always say a third of our investors are very mission aligned. They love what we're doing. They are driven by giving back to the community in some way or doing true social impact. A third like our returns, but really also just to them, that is icing on the cake. A third of our investors couldn't care less. They go, I just want the good passive income and some of the unique attributes of real estate investing. In some cases, we have a portion of our fund that's an opportunity zone fund. So they want to take advantage of those things. And you cannot judge, you cannot discriminate, right? Meaning that I take all of those pockets of capital. And I will tell you, I remember one specific instance where one of our largest investors in our second fund, we attracted him through his money manager. These are family offices. You rarely see the guy behind the veil, then I was in New York for a set of meetings, and I contacted his manager and said, look, I've got a meeting set up with him. And he goes, you did? How did you do that? And I go, I don't know. I sent him an email. He said, come meet me in my office. And I go, but tell me a little bit about him and what he's interested in. He goes, he has no interest in social impact. And I go, I mean, does he know what he invested in? And so I go up to meet with this guy who's a billionaire in New York and Madison Avenue, right? And we have an hour-and-a-half meeting, and he got so excited about what we're doing in the communities and in the way we were doing it. And he has been one of our largest nonprofit supporters. And every year he writes a fairly significant check now. He's given away millions of dollars to large universities that I think, we don't need it as much as our communities, but he's written us significant checks every year. And so you never know, even folks that you perceive may not be as mission driven. Ultimately, I think that I remain an optimist that in the heart of all of us, there is a desire to really make the world a better place. And I think that even the wealthiest folks really think about this agenda of how do you ensure that we preserve the economic system, the free enterprise system of the country through really intelligent investing, of which we hope we're one example of.
So I think your response, though, does suggest to me that you are tapping into folks who have capital and do care about what it does, even if they say they don't, which I think is interesting in suggesting there are some out there, and you found a way to get there. I expect that a lot of the people who are just investors now, for the return and opportunity zone. I mean, you were doing it before there was an opportunity zone. You were doing a lot of this, and you were already proving that you could run a profitable business. The other side of it, though, was sort of on the delivery end of it. And there you talked about partnering with nonprofits. And again, it sort of seems to me, listening to this, like that's part of it also, that you are delivering something through mechanisms that are more rooted in the community than is often the case with commercial real estate, and that have access, understand the communities better, than folks from outside might be able to, and their needs and can meet them.
Yeah, and I think we, invested very early in building out a social impact team. We have a chief impact officer. Before Prince Harry was a chief impact officer, and it became a cool term. And we today have over 10 people dedicated to that function. And they work with those 40 nonprofit partners on a day-to-day basis. These are grassroots organizations that are dealing with the issues that I mentioned, which are, around workforce preparedness, around career training, around drug intervention, and a whole host of social issues. And those become, in some respects, much of the way we get input from the community. These are organizations that have been there, in many cases, even longer than we have, and really working at a grassroots level. And those are really critical partnerships. I will say, because I think the earlier question may have alluded to this, and it's not to throw any industry under the bus, but we met with some of the largest philanthropic endowments. I'm not going to name their names, but you probably know who they are, that have huge statements around diversity and equity and racial equity, and that are really, their entire function is they're not the largest nonprofits in the country. And we talk to them, they'd go, oh, we love what you're doing. As I said, they would go, okay, talk to our investment committee, talk to the real estate folks. And we didn't get barely a penny from that entire industry, right? And I studied that because it was such a mystery. I mean, in one case, I remember one of the largest foundations said, listen, this sounds really good, but for us, we really want to only invest in KKR, Blackstone, BlackRock, and this list of approved vendors. Steve Schwartzman really needs our support. And I go, okay, I guess I understand where that is. And so I think I call it out because there is this somewhat reverse social impact tax, right? Where they want the social impact, but they don't want to put risk behind it, and they don't want to put capital behind it. And I think that has to change. And I hope there's, I think individuals at those organizations that really just are passionate and really understand what we're trying to do. But I think institutionally, there is really a big logjam. So we'll see. I will stay optimistic. One of the things that you do when you raise capital is you go into every meeting thinking this must be the one. This is going to be the right one. Yet to see it in that capacity. And we've got investors from the largest capitalistic institutions, Goldman and Bain Capital and Silver Lake and GA. And these are very well-intentioned organizations and individuals that have decided they wanted to support what we're doing.
So I'm going to pick up some questions from our audience. one asks if your successful investments have helped convince banks and others to invest in the area. Are you seeing other folks, following you in, and banks that might have been, you mentioned when you started how reluctant folks were to the idea of doing this. Do you see are folks following, particularly the banks?
The banks are, and I think the banks have been some of our best partners, specifically just because they're investors. Ally Bank, Pacific Premier Bank, we've partnered effectively over the years with First Republic Bank. So the banks, I think, despite a history that many banks have had of redlining, and perhaps it's because of the regulation, have really partnered with us both on the capital and equity side and on the debt side. Are other people following? I think so, I hope so, but not fast enough and not enough. One of the things is that over the years, we, in our entire capital raising, we didn't ever ask anybody to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And folks would go, do you want us to sign an NDA? I go, no, you don't have to sign an NDA. If you want to beg, borrow, and steal our ideas, please do so. If you want to take what we're doing and make it, available in Tulsa and Cleveland and Chicago, hallelujah. And so to us, while we certainly have some proprietary approaches and sort of strategies, really this is about creating that. For us, this is a grand experiment. Can it be done? And we hope that others beg, borrow, and steal our ideas and replicate them and improve on them, quite candidly improve on them as they implement them in communities. And in fact, even in South Central, we always go, look, we want other developers to come down and stand shoulder to shoulder with us.
Thanks. And another question that someone's put forward, it has to do with stuff that doesn't work. Did you have partnerships or programs or projects that you tried that didn't work? And what lessons did you learn, or what would you do differently now?
I think that we certainly have always been very ambitious and often pursued too many things in parallel. So I think that we've kind of continued to really refine and focus our initiatives. As I said, our first two funds focused on rehabbing affordable housing. And we always took great joy in taking on some of these tough bills. I got to tell you the number, and these are not anecdotals, but Gray and my partner and I would go down, we would negotiate with drug dealers. We would evict, pimps out of our buildings. I remember one guy, while we were doing the inspection, I said, listen, can I go in and inspect the building? He goes, no, there are folks in there. I go, if you want to pay me, his name was Suave. It's like classic. And so I'm negotiating with him to get into the building. And these, and these aren't tasks that we delegated often. We realized that didn't scale. We bought buildings that were often 80, 90 years old, and we really, in some cases, they required much more work than we expected. So those are lessons that, I would say that part of what you point to is, while we're mission driven, you never want to get in over your skis. We have to demonstrate that we can do this at scale and profitably. And we are unapologetic about that, as you point out. We're a for-profit company. And I think that we hope that others realize ways that you can do both. But so some of those, those would be some of the lessons. I think we've also relied more on partners. And I think that has been a lesson that at some points, I'm a control freak, and therefore we wanted to do it all. We have a very vertically integrated company, and so we've kept that, but they're very, really sustainable partners that have been doing this at the ground level for many years. And we've just found ways to be better partners with them.
Now, there's another question that I'm going to expand on a little bit because it's a really good one, which has to do with policy. Something we in Smart Growth America obviously are very involved in. And it has to do with just your kind of blue sky thought about what policies you change to make it easier to achieve your mission. And when I say policy, I'm interpreting this as, you're subject to local government regulation, you're subject to state government regulation, there are federal policies. Martin, if we put you in charge of legislating and your goal is to make it easier for you and people like you to do what you're doing, what are the things that you would want to change?
Wow. One of the things that I've always said is we're not thought leaders, we're action leaders. So I don't spend a lot of time. I'm glad that organizations like Smart Growth America are really doing, and having heard some of the presentations over the last couple of days, really just great thought, and strategy into developing it. In general, we try to say we'd prefer the government stay out of the way. California is a very regulated state, and I can't tell you the number of folks that I've spoken to in the last year that have said, I've almost given up on California because of homelessness, because of rising crime, because of the lack of affordability. We're moving to Florida and we're moving to Texas. And it's just very discouraging, but because I think, and these are folks that live in Beverly Hills and Bel Air, right? They're still living there going, and I go, listen, the only way we can solve this is if we come together. Now, from a policy standpoint, I think that the thing that, in a city like Los Angeles, it would be number one, simplification. A lot of policy was created to have good intentions, but then the unintended consequences really skew the policy. So simplification, and then the other is assuredness of the outcome. So I think a lot of what has happened around land use has been to say, listen, if you meet these parameters, you will get this number of units to be developed, and you can waive these parking restrictions. So and then the final thing I would say, and I've challenged both the mayor of LA, Eric Garcetti, and the head of the building and planning commissions to say, look, let's get a process in which we can get an affordable housing project, if it's covenanted affordable with these parameters, approved in 60 days. And they look at me like I've got 3 heads, because in LA it can take up to 9 months. In some cases it can take up to 15 months. So that speed and the surety of getting through that permitting and planning process would be critical. And I don't want to be, but I've spoken to Osama Yoon, the head of building and safety, about this in LA many times, and said, let's make a challenge. Let's do it in 60 days and let's see how the world reacts. And I think, LA is facing a 500,000 unit shortfall in affordable housing. The homelessness pandemic is rampant. And these are things that can be solved. Candidly, we will end up building 6,000 units over the course of 5 years, with a city that has raised billions of dollars under Triple H and Measure H to build 10,000 units at $600,000 a door. And we're building at half of that. So again, I don't mean to, if I sound sharp-elbowed, it's not intended, but I think that our governments, our planners need to be more bold in pushing this, and we hope they do that.
Great. I'll try to squeeze in a couple more as we come close to time. There's a question that I think is in the minds of many people, which is whether you have thoughts on how to best ensure that displacement doesn't occur as buildings and homes, appreciate, because, you're creating value. It's going to continue to be value, as well as being, part of the community already living in the neighborhood in which your units are located. What's going to ensure that displacement doesn't happen going forward?
Yeah, I think it's several things. Number one is being intentional about it. One of the things that we're very proud of is 96% of our tenants are African-American and Latinx. About 80% of our tenants are low income. We've found ways to ensure that their rent still gets paid through various programs and subsidies and whatnot, but there are ways to be intentional about it. And the first is you have to be intentional that you do not want to displace. I'll make another point, which may be somewhat controversial, but I think that the focus on gentrification alone misses the point. I heard this from one of the residents at a city planning meeting that I attended in Harbor Gateway, which is the intersection of the 110 and 105 in LA. And she, after we presented a project, she said, this is exactly what my community needs. It was not a fully affordable project. It was a mixed use project. And she indirectly said the opposite of gentrification is economic segregation, right? We don't want all the poor people in the community stuffed into one area just because that area is not putting up a big fight and is more open-minded. So we think that really what is beautiful in society is when you have people of different socioeconomic backgrounds coexisting and living together. For a long time, I thought New York was the best example of it. I lived in New York for many years, and you could get onto the subway, and if you were a young Black kid, you could see a plumber and a doorman and an attorney and an investment banker. You could touch them, you could share the train with them. But that is the beautiful society in my view, which is that you want people from all walks of life coexisting, and we've been able to do that in some of our buildings. And I think things like the Beehive and initiatives that really create economic development in those communities ensure that the jobs stay and people prosper. So it's probably a longer-winded answer, but it can be done with the right intentionality.
We obviously have many questions coming through we're not going to be able to get to today, partly why we're looking forward to extend the work of the Equity Summit throughout the year. I do want to give you an opportunity for one closing set of comments, and to really thank you for again for being here. But if you could summarize any major takeaways, that lessons learned that you'd like to share with aspiring developers, investors, community builders, and other stakeholders, based on all this experience, what lessons would you particularly like them to know and to take away?
It's a great question, and despite it just being a new year, we have this sort of annual planning session, and I think that it's probably a little bit broader in terms of their themes that I would encourage practitioners, planners, investors to take on. One of them is to just simply be bold, and I think that coming out of the false summit of COVID, right? We thought we got to the top of the mountain, and then we looked up and there was still another mountain, and we all have that heaviness of dealing with yet another mountain that we have to climb. And so it is really in 2022 to continue to be bold, to continue to be optimistic. Our theme of 2022 in terms of SoLa is stand and deliver, right? Let's deliver on, we've made bold projections, and we really want to be able to demonstrate and deliver on that. And so I think, I hope folks take heart in not being discouraged by what has certainly been 2 years of really a challenging social environment. There's a lot of choppy waters out there, and I think we just sort of want to acknowledge that. I want to again commend organizations like Smart Growth America for really starting off the year with such an important set of discussions. But we're going to be bold, and we're going to stand and deliver.
Thank you very much, Martin. It's been very inspiring, and